there, folks. Are you passionate about democracy and concerned about the rise of authoritarianism? I'm Joanne, Kevin's wife, and I've seen him give everything to this work. That's why Coffee with Democrats matters, lifting up stories, building connections, and keeping democracy strong. So tune in every Tuesday at 7 p.m. for 30 minutes of conversation with elected officials, candidates, and Democratic influencers, only on Coffee with Democrats. So join me in welcoming the Executive Director and host of Coffee with Democrats, my husband, Kevin Dawson.
Well, hey, good morning and welcome to Coffee with Democrats. This is not Tuesday night. This is starting a series of Coffee with Democrats segments that are going to be daily from about 7:15 to 7:45. It's going to give us an opportunity to talk about a lot of different subjects, but primarily it's going to give us that opportunity to talk about the labor commissioner race, the race that I'm involved in. So let's talk a little bit about that, and let's get into this. Bear with me just a little bit. I'm still trying to get things together, trying to get my earphones put in. Some of the things that I'm going to be doing with this Coffee with Kevin segments on every morning is my desire is to have a call-in segment. So you'll be able to call in and ask me questions. But right now, I'm still trying to develop that and work on it. And if I can get this going here today, I definitely will make sure that we put that up on the screen. But for today's purpose, I want to talk in detail. Oh my goodness, these things are driving me crazy. Maybe I got them on the wrong ear. Let me try them the other way. I'm trying a new set of earphones, so bear with me as I'm trying to get these things to work for me. But here's what the Oklahoma Labor Commissioner is actually supposed to do. And that's a question that I get asked often whenever I'm doing my town halls. And it's an important question, particularly during an election, because you're going to hear candidates tell you what they want to do with this office. You're going to hear candidate campaign platforms, and you're going to hear promises. And you're going to hear ideas about what somebody thinks the labor commissioner ought to be. But here's what I think is fascinating about this particular office. You don't have to take my word for it. All of those things that I'm talking about happening, those are already written out. The job description for the the Oklahoma Commissioner of Labor has already been established and written out by the Oklahoma legislature. They told us what the job description is. And today I want to spend some time actually looking at the law. So again, bear with me as I'm trying to get things organized here where I can, these are brand new earphones to me and they're driving me nuts. So as with everything out here, we're trying to update, upgrade, and bring you the best possible show available. So what exactly does the labor commissioner do? What is the job description? So the very first thing that we have to look at is Title 40, Section 1 of the Labor Commissioner's duties and responsibilities. And it's very simple. The statute begins by establishing something important. The Commissioner is the chief executive of the Department of Labor and supervises the department's work. Now comes the part I want every Oklahoma voter to know about, and the law tells us what the duty of the Labor Commissioner actually is. It's to foster, promote, and develop the welfare of the wage earners of this state, improve working conditions of the wage earners, advance opportunities of wage earners for profitable employment, and carry into effect all laws in relation to the labor in relation to labor enacted by the legislature for which responsibility is assigned to the Commissioner of Labor. Folks, that's it. That's the job. Notice that the whole area that we're talking about in section 1 talks about foster, promote, develop the welfare of the wage earners of the state, improve working conditions of the wage earners, advance opportunities of wage earners for profitable employment, and carry into effect all laws in relation to labor enacted by the legislature for which responsibility is assigned to the Commissioner of Labor. But notice the first 3 sentences. Every single one of them is talking about the wage earner. That I find that very fascinating, because when I was first researching the Commissioner of Labor position, and I was trying to come up with what I wanted to put on my walk cards, and I've got one right here in front of me, and I'll read from it. The very first thing that I thought about when I thought about running for this job was 2 things. What is the job required? And then what do I want to do with that? And the first thing I wanted to do is I'm running to support the dedicated professionals at the Oklahoma Department of Labor. Notice that goes back to what the very first requirement is of the Commissioner of Labor. The statute begins by establishing something important. The Commissioner is the chief executive of the Department of Labor and supervises the department's work. And that's the reason why I said right here on this page, right here where my finger is, I said I'm running to support the dedicated professionals at the Oklahoma Department of Labor. They serve all 77 counties, enforcing workplace safety standards, supporting workers and responsible employers, and oversees critical inspections that keep the public safe. That's in a nutshell what the job requires. And that's the reason why I talk about enforcing workplace standards, safety standards, and supporting the workers first, is because you look at the first 3 sentences of the duties and responsibilities, the statutory duties of the job. All of them talk about the wage earners. They don't talk about the responsible employers. But again, in order to have wage earners, you have to have responsible employers. That's plain and simple. You can't have one without the other. And that's why I think it's so important for us to have this discussion. Economic development for the state of Oklahoma depends on having responsible employers who hire people as wage earners. It's essential. I mean, go back to when the state was still a territory and they were still trying to establish this state. What were some of the very first things that came to this state? Well, history tells us a lot of things that came to this state was people looking for land. They displaced a lot of people that were natives, but everybody who came here, including the natives, had something, had a lot of, ideas about what they could do with community. Then it kind of changed and things took over. But here's what I found it very simple. When the land runs started taking place for Oklahoma, when we had a lot of immigrants coming to Oklahoma, what was the first thing that they wanted to do? They found a job somewhere. They did something, whether it was cattle, horses, blacksmithing. All of those things required somebody to put up the money and say, all right, I'm going to start my business. And then what's the first thing I'm going to do? I'm going to go hire somebody. I want a wage earner that works for me to help me expand my business. Then it grew from there. That's the essentials of the job and the duties and responsibilities of what I see happen within the state of Oklahoma. It started with people starting small businesses and growing from there. Cattle was a big issue in the state of Oklahoma, but with that comes a lot of other jobs, feed stores, um, people who needed cattle feed, they needed hay. All of those things were job opportunities for people coming into the state of Oklahoma. Then that grew from there. We needed banks. So whenever we needed to go get a loan for how we wanted to start our business, we needed to have a bank. We needed to have those abilities to get that money and purchase some of the things that we needed, whether it be land, a building, paying for rent. So a bank, again, it's a responsible business that had wage earners that worked for them. All right, that's the history lesson, and I'm going to conclude there because we can get in and get bogged down in all the different things, and we can get really bogged down in a lot of different culture issues there as well. I don't want to go there because I want to come to today and let's talk about where we are today. The Department of Labor, what it does today is, again, first and foremost, the safety and welfare. I mean, think about it. Foster, promote, and develop the welfare of wage earners. That is everything that I just talked about. You know, it's fostering, promoting, and developing the welfare of wage earners. And what is that particularly? What's first and foremost? Safety. Let's talk about what I did for 43 years. I was in safety critical environments. I went through a lot of education and training. Started in 1979 as a locomotive fireman. I went through training almost every day. There was something new to learn every day that I went to work. And as I learned those things and became proficient at it, then I took on more responsibility. And one of the things that was asked of me very early was, would you go into engine service? The railroad that I worked for at the time, Missouri Pacific Railroad, was in dire need of engineers because they were having a large turnover of engineers because the World War II and post-World War II employees, engineers that hired on in the 40s and 50s were getting it to the age very rapidly where they were going to retire. And the Missouri Pacific Railroad in Wichita was very short of locomotive engineers. So I was only 18 years old when they asked me to start my training to become a locomotive engineer. So I started training on that safety critical nature of operating trains. And as I developed that skill and I became more proficient at it over a 6-month period, I was able to go back to class in Little Rock, Arkansas, to our locomotive engineer training program. And I was able to take my examination for locomotive engineer. After I did that, I returned back to Wichita. And the very first trip that I took as a locomotive engineer, I had a road foreman of engines supervise what I was doing and watch me and the proficient ability to operate the train. Once that was completed and that trip was over with, I started my seniority on that date. And that date was in December of 1980. I was only 19 years old. At that point, I became one of the youngest locomotive engineers in American history, in U.S. history. There was 2 of us that was actually 19 years old. Another person that was just a few weeks older than me. So, you know, when it came to being younger, I was the younger of the 2 of us in age. Both of us hired on about the same time. I think he hired on before me about 3 weeks. And he was about 3 weeks in age older than me as well. And then when I took the examination, he ended up taking it first. So at that point, he was the youngest. Then when I took mine, I became the youngest. So that's the history about what I did and became a locomotive engineer and how quickly I became a locomotive engineer. But then I started in management in 1994. And those things that I did there was I became a trainer. I talked and I trained people about our what we call G-Core, General Code of Operating Rules. Uh, the proficiency of learning the G-Core and how it is based on the CFR Part 240 and other CFR segments, and hazardous material handling and training and emergency response. I became a train the trainer, so I was actually training people to train our train crews how to provide those rules and examinations. I also was very big on public safety. I spent several years as a public safety manager covering 5 different states: Illinois, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Iowa, and Missouri. I supervised hundreds of employees. And while I was a public safety manager, I was responsible for the public safety of over 10,000 of our employees because I was public safety manager for the northern region of Union Pacific Railroad. And that was a very fun and exciting time for me. I loved public safety because it put me in direct contact with municipalities, counties, state officials, as well as federal officials on helping to upgrade crossings and look at situations where we had, whether it be the railroad had issues or whether the county had issues. And we worked in cooperation with one another and with landowners to try to mitigate some of the problems. One of the issues that we had on the railroad that I worked on very heavily was vegetation control. And that put me in direct contact with a lot of municipalities, counties, officials, and landowners to try to clear vegetation so that it wasn't growing right up into that, that close quadrant where it limited the ability of people to be able to see the train coming down the tracks. A lot of areas in Illinois, Missouri, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Iowa, they've got a lot of hedgerows that were planted, and a lot of vegetation just naturally grew up after the railroad was built along the railroad right-of-way. And also the landowners planted stuff in the fence rows, so it made it hard. Those were things that I've mitigated and worked on. But again, those are just minor issues compared to some of the other more critical safety issues that we had, like accident investigation. Whether it be an automobile that ran out in front of a train, that I investigated that, or a person who walked out in front of a train, or a train derailment itself. I've investigated hundreds of incidents and put out recommendations on how to prevent those things from happening in the future. I developed and helped develop a lot of key initiatives on the railroad where we changed the operating rules and responsibilities that way. So that's kind of the background of my training, but the critical nature of that was, hey, look, if you went to work and you didn't have your head cut in to the railroad operations from the very beginning, you'd fall apart. And what I mean by that is, if you didn't comply with the rules, you didn't go home. That's how critical the railroad was. There was no do-overs, no mulligans on the railroad. You had to do it right the first time, or you became injured very severely, very quickly. Now, a couple of things that I want to unpack in the duties and responsibilities of the labor commissioner. When I talk about foster, promote, and develop the welfare of wage earners, that also includes knowing who it specifically identified. That's the nurses, that's teachers, firefighters, that's a person working in a warehouse, that's a person behind the counter of a convenience store, that's the person working at a factory, that's somebody driving a truck, somebody working construction, and that's the people who get up every morning and go earn a paycheck. The people that work all night long, work long shifts, work in this heat that we have right now on a daily basis outside. And Oklahoma law says their welfare matters to the office of labor commissioner. And notice the other thing that the law actually says: improve working conditions. This is your natural bridge to safety. Working conditions aren't some abstract political idea. Is your workplace safe? That's a question that I want to ask everybody. Are the laws that apply to your workplace being enforced? Are public employees being protected by the safety standards that apply to them? Are children who enter the workforce being protected by child labor laws? Those are real things to the Department of Labor and what the Department of Labor has to deal with. Oklahoma Department of Labor also itself currently describes its functions in enforcing the functions that it's responsible for also include enforcing wage and hour and child labor laws, overseeing public sector workplace safety through PEOSH, which is Public Employees Occupational Safety and Health, and providing OSHA consultation services to private employers and administrating numerous safety and licensing programs. And again, all of the things that we're talking about are parallel duties and responsibilities that I'm applying for that I've already done in the past. All of these things that I've just talked about right there are parallel. I've already got the qualifications, and that's why whenever you hear me during my campaign, I am the most qualified person for this position, and I'm the only person qualified for this job. It's because I've already done all of these jobs in a different capacity. But it's transferable. All of the stuff that I've done in the past is immediately transferable, like leading people. To my knowledge, none of the other people who are running for this office have ever led a department, have never led people. I have. I've got that experience. I've managed people firsthand. So let's go back and talk about the statute a little bit more. Advance opportunities for wage earners for profitable employment. Now let's talk up about this just a little bit. There's another phrase that I want you to remember: profitable employment. The law doesn't merely talk about employment. It talks about advancing opportunities for wage earners for profitable employment. What exactly does that mean in 2026? That's a conversation worth having, because if we're talking about Oklahoma's workforce, I think we ought to start by asking what benefits the people who actually make up the workforce. I mean, we hear it all the time from some of my opponents. You're going to hear them on the news. They've recently been on the news about how they want to build this pipeline. And some of the things that they talk about, I keep thinking, is that completely in line with what we're supposed to be doing as the Commissioner of Labor? Because again, if we're building in a pipeline for employers, I think we're getting the message completely wrong. We should be building a pipeline for the employees, something that benefits the employees. Are we going to give them a job that has benefits? Are we going to give them a job where they have access to union labor so that they can actually have a better future for themselves by having union representation and negotiate better wages, safety, and working conditions, as well as benefits? Are they going to be able to have a future like retirement programs or anything like that? I really think that those are questions that we have to ask of people who keep talking about we got to build pipelines. Because again, I think we put the cart before the horse whenever we say, let's build the pipeline for the employees, when in fact we should be building the pipeline for I said that wrong. Building a pipeline for the employers when we should be building a pipeline for employees. I want to say that again. I think we're getting it wrong whenever we say that we wouldn't have to build a pipeline for employees or employers because employers are struggling to find people to work. When in fact we should be trying to find the opportunity for a pipeline for employees that will actually improve their wages, their benefits, and their retirement, and their futures, and give them an opportunity for future advancement as well. And if they want to go into ownership and have their own ownership, I want to do that. Now, the last thing that I'm going to talk about here today is some of the other statutory requirements that the Department of Labor actually does. I'm not going to go into these too hard, and I'm not going to overstate what the Commissioner's legal authority has, but I am going to say this, that the Department of Labor actually has real world safety responsibilities to the public. Have you ever ridden an elevator, an escalator? Have you ever been in a building where a boiler or pressure vessel took place? And what I mean by that is a boiler pressure vessel, these high capacity boilers that actually feed the heat in the wintertime for your building. Are those things, do you work around those? There's a lot of other pressure vessel boiler systems out there when it comes to chemical storage, pressurized gas, things of that nature. And then the last one that I want to talk about, well, there's a couple more that I want to talk about is, have you ever put your child or grandchild on an amusement ride? Or yourself, do you go out and ride amusement rides? The Department of Safety has regulatory and safety responsibilities touching all of these things. They also include asbestos abatement, alternative fuels, certification of welders, certification of alarm and locksmith licensing, and fire and sprinkler licensing. So people ask me, Kevin, why does the labor commissioner matter? And my answer is because the department touches people's lives in ways most Oklahomans don't even realize. And that's why it's so important that you have to have the right person who's qualified for the job. And I have to ask this question over and over again of you. Do your own research and you tell me who is the most qualified person for the job. Now, somebody listening might say, Kevin, everything you've read says wage earners. What about businesses? And I talked about that earlier. Responsible employers have an enormous stake in the Department of Labor. If you're following Oklahoma's wage laws, you shouldn't have to compete against someone who gains an advantage by illegally withholding wages. If you're investing money in safety, you shouldn't be at a disadvantage because somebody has decided to cut corners is cheaper. And if you don't understand a regulation, government ought to help you understand what compliance requirements are. That's plain and simple, and that's why I think it's so important that we have to have somebody who is qualified and understands the entirety of the duties and responsibilities of the labor commissioner. And the last point that I want to talk about is fair enforcement creates a level playing field. And this brings me back to this election. I'm asking you to do something that might sound unusual coming from a candidate. Don't take my word for it. Go read Title 40, Section 1 yourself. Then go look at my campaign. Go look at my opponent's campaigns. Look at what I'm talking about. Look at what they're talking about and compare all of us against the same job description. Not the job description that I wrote. I'm talking about the job description that the legislature of the state of Oklahoma wrote. Then ask yourself these questions. Does the candidate's vision foster, promote, and develop the welfare of wage earners? Does it improve working conditions? Does it advance opportunities for wage earners for profitable employment? And does it demonstrate an understanding of the labor laws the department is actually responsible for carrying out? Those are fair questions. In fact, I think they're questions the entire election ought to be about. So, folks, I appreciate you being on here. I think we've come to the end of this segment today. We've been here about 30 minutes, but I'd like to finish with a couple of things. A couple of things is, and this is what I always loved whenever I was teaching. I always started my teaching process because I would tell people what I'm going to talk about. Then I would talk about what I needed them to learn, and then I would go back and I would talk about what they just learned. So I'm going to use that same thing here. So again, we're going to rehash the question. So what is the labor commissioners and what are they actually supposed to do? What is he or she? actually supposed to do. We don't have to guess. We don't have to invent the mission. And all candidates don't get to redefine the office simply because there's something else they'd rather campaign about. Oklahoma already gave us the answer. The commissioner leads the Department of Labor. And the law says the commissioner has a duty to foster, promote, and develop the welfare of Oklahoma's wage earners, improve their working conditions, advance their opportunities for profitable employment, and carry out the labor laws entrusted to the office. That's not my campaign slogan. That is the law. And that's why I wrote it into my campaign. And if you want to know what kind of labor commissioner I intend to be, start there. Then go to my website, kevinldawson.com. Look at my platform, look at my experience. Then look at everybody else who's asking for this job and ask one question. Which candidate is actually running to do the job Oklahoma law says the labor commissioner is supposed to do? That's ultimately your decision. But at least now you know the job description. So tomorrow on Coffee with Kevin, we're going to take apart one little word in the statute that makes an enormous difference, and that's the word shall. Because Oklahoma law doesn't say the labor commissioner may do these things. It says the commissioner shall do it. And we're going to talk about why it matters. And folks, I would like for you to contact as many people as you can. Let them know that we're going to do this segment Monday through Friday from about 7:15 to 7:45 every day. We might run a little bit long, go to 8 o'clock. But I want to have at least 25 to 30 minutes of your time to talk naturally and talk about the duties and responsibilities of the job. Hey folks, I can't ask you enough. Please go to my website, kevinldawson.com. Check it out. If you go on socials and you're looking at us now, either on YouTube or Facebook, go take those go look at my profiles and look exactly what I'm actually asking to do for this job. I'm not trying to make some big pie in the sky claims about what I want the job to be. I'm actually trying to be what the law requires me to be. And I'm asking you to just spread the word and also spread the word about some of the other people for commissioner. And let's start with Rhonda Eastman, who's running for Corporation Commission. Follow her as well. She is doing some great things in the state of Oklahoma and getting in front of a lot of Republicans. So go out and look at what she's doing. Follow her on social media. Rhonda Eastman is a true class act, and she's going to be a fantastic commissioner, commerce commissioner whenever she is, or corporation commissioner whenever she's voted on and voted into office. And the next person I want to talk about is Craig McIntyre. Craig McIntyre is running for insurance commissioner, and I'm going to tell you straight up, there is nobody more qualified in the state of Oklahoma to do that job than Craig McIntyre. Craig McIntyre, he has this uncanny ability. I think he must have worked as an underwriter. I'm trying to remember exactly what he called it, but he has this really uncanny way of taking these very complex legal wording of things that we, in the insurance industry that they talk about, and he brings it down to plain English that we can understand. I love that about him, and I don't know anybody else out there who's trying to do that and trying to put into plain English what he can and cannot do, and what anybody who's running for that position can and cannot do. And we're all looking for opportunities to reduce our insurance costs because Oklahoma leads the nation in insurance costs. We've got to bring that down, and we're not going to do it under the same leadership that we have right now. That leadership has allowed for this to foster and fester and build, and to the point where it's out of control. We've got to have somebody like Craig who can actually start reining in, because he understands the business and he understands the language, the actual contracts that are out there, that contract language, and he can actually negotiate in hard English with the people that are the insurance corporations, and he can start holding them accountable. I love that about him. So that's my Coffee with Kevin segment today, folks. Until tomorrow, 7:15. Let's keep this conversation going. Thank you for coming on today and listening.
Coffee with Democrats is broadcast from the multimedia studio inside the Cleveland County Democrats office with their gracious permission to use the space. Our thanks to the Cleveland County Democrats Central Committee and Chair Jamie Shelton for accommodating our Tuesday night show.